Hi, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This week's video is a repaint of a piece that I did years ago and I was never truly satisfied with it, so it's been shoved in the back of my storage unit for quite a while until I decided to drag it out and repaint it. I had a vision for it. I also needed to disguise some big cracks in the side and I'll show you how I did that. But also the vision for this started out a little bit different and it's just been dragging for quite a long time in the background. And it started out a completely different colour to what it is now, and I will talk you through why I changed my mind and how I ended up with the finished piece. So as you can see, this piece is previously painted. I used Dixie Belle Products on it. It was quite a few years ago. I think the colours were muscadine wine, aubergine, possibly a bit of black wax, can't remember. So I've tried to record this several times, but each time I overcomplicate it. So I have put a video on my YouTube channel of how to strip wax, and I'm going to link it at the top now. If you want to know how to take wax off a piece before you paint it, that's the video you need. This one, slightly different. I have used Dixie Belle's Best Dang Wax. It's a water-based wax. You can paint straight over it, no problem. However, I am going to remove this Best Dang Wax because I used sea spray on the original finish. So this has got quite a bit of texture on the surface. It might not pick it up, but it has got texture on it. I want to sand that smooth. What happens is when you sand any wax, it clogs your sandpaper up. That's oil-based or water-based wax. I have started to sand the top, and as you can see, I don't know if it'll pick it up because the sandpaper is a very similar colour to the paint finish, which is obviously going to disguise the kind of clogged wax and paint up on here. So these sandpaper sheets that I use for my festal are actually quite expensive. I don't want to go through 4 or 5 sheets of sandpaper by sanding the wax off this piece. What I'd much rather do is use a little bit of wire wool and some white spirits, which is a lot cheaper, and take the wax off that way. So just to recap, because I've tried to record this several times and I keep overcomplicating it, if you've used Best Dang Wax to finish your project and you want to repaint it, you can repaint over the top of Best Dang Wax, no problem. You don't usually have to strip it off. The only reason I'm stripping this off is because I want to sand the texture smooth that I created with the original paint finish. I don't want to sand that surface because it's got wax on it. The wax will clog my sanding sheets. The sanding sheets are expensive, so I'm using white spirits and wire wool to take the wax off. Then I will sand the texture smooth, then I can paint. I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, please feel free to leave any questions in the comments and I will get back to them, because that's just blown my tiny mind, let alone anybody else's. And also, can we just take a minute for this amazing t-shirt colour? This is a Dixie Belle t-shirt and I am loving this shade of blue, especially when I've got a tan. So taking wax off a piece is actually really simple. Sometimes I'll use my scraper if it's an original wax finish, because sometimes the wax that they put on is really quite durable and very thick. So sometimes you'll see me using a carbide scraper. This I don't need to do that with because, like I say, it's a water-based wax, which means I can technically paint over it anyway. So if there are any little remnants of wax on the surface, it doesn't matter. So all I'm going to do is use my white spirits, sometimes it's known as mineral spirits, a little bit of wire wool. I'm just going to put some on the wire wool and then I'm just going to just rub it over the surface. I'm going to do section by section because white spirits evaporates really quickly, so you don't want it to have dried down before you wipe it off. So you need to work fairly quickly and just kind of agitate the wax. I can see it because I use black wax, so I can see the wax being removed. And then before it's dried, before the white spirits has had time to dry, so this is essentially dissolving the wax. So white spirits dissolves wax finishes. So I'm just going to rub it off, and then I'm going to take my shot cloth before it's had a chance to dry, and just wipe it over the surface. That's how much black wax I use, quite a lot. You know how I like my waxing. So that's all I need to do. I'm just going to work section by section, taking off the majority of the wax, just so that it doesn't clog my sandpaper up. Once I've taken the wax off, I then just sanded it with my electric sander to get rid of all that texture. You can see how much texture now was on that piece, so I just wanted to get rid of that and sand it smooth. Okay, so as I was sanding this piece, it's become apparent why I went so heavy with the texture first time round. It's all come flooding back to me. So this is the side panel of the piece. The front is round here, so both of these side panels have got big splits in them, and I've just checked and the split goes all the way through to the inside. Usually when you've got a crack or a split in the wood, you can just fill it and sand it and paint over the top of it. The risk when it's gone all the way through to the other side is that it could move. There could be movement in the future. So I am going to do something to these side panels to cover up the fact that just in case that split moves again in the wood, because it is all the way from left to right, and like I say, it goes all the way through to the inside. So I'm gonna mask the splits just in case. Like I say, it is filled. I'm gonna sand it, and the chances of it moving again, unlikely, but there is a small chance. So I'm gonna do something to these side panels, but first I'm gonna sand that filler down smooth and then get a base coat of paint on. So everything's pretty much smooth, but as I've said, this piece is a little bit shabby, so we're going to make it a little bit shabbier, and we're going to embrace that kind of shabbiness, and we're going to go shabby chic. It's not dead, it's never been dead. Don't let anybody tell you any different. The colour that I'm starting off with might surprise you. It's neutral. It's called drop cloth. It's like a antique-y white, so it's going to be the perfect base. Don't worry, all you colour lovers out there that follow me, for my use of colour, this is not going to be a white piece, don't panic, but I'm going to use drop cloth as my base. As you may have gathered from the introduction, this piece ended up a different colour to my original plan. So this base colour is actually kind of irrelevant, but I thought I'd show you the steps that I took and what I did to get to the end result. So had I have known I was going to start out using Hampton Olive, I wouldn't have used this as a base colour because it wouldn't have been necessary. So that's dried. You probably can't see it on camera, but there is still a visible little line. I'm just worried because the crack goes entirely from left to right, and it also goes up through to the inside as well. I'm just worried that when this cabinet moves around, or if the temperature changes or humidity changes, that crack is going to kind of go a little bit further, or it might not. It could be fine for years. So this is my idea. I keep cutting myself off right down here. This is my idea to kind of there's an ice cream man in the background now. Every time I start to record, this is my idea to kind of disguise if that happens again. So most decoupage paper is quite thin, and if that crack does split any further or go any deeper or get worse, obviously the rice paper or the decoupage paper isn't going to hide that particularly well. So this was actually a suggestion from one of my furniture painting friends, and this is anaglypta wallpaper. So it's very inexpensive, and it's like a 3D pattern on there, and it's very, very thick. Now, disclaimer, I've never done this before, so we're gonna go through the process together. It could turn out terrible, it might not work, but that is what I'm thinking in my head. So these side panels are going to have this anaglypta 3-dimensional kind of raised pattern wallpaper, whatever you want to call it, glued to the side, and hopefully if that crack ever comes back, or if it gets slightly worse, I'm hoping it won't ever do that, but you never know. But if that happens, I'm hoping that this really thick paper will basically disguise it, because you're papering over cracks. There's a saying, isn't there? Don't paper over cracks. But in this case, we are going to. So I've just cut down a piece of the wallpaper, and the plan is to just literally put the wallpaper in that panel bit there. And then once it's glued down and dried, I can just paint over the top of it and just make it look like it's part of the thing. A little bit like I've done before with a raised stencil, except that obviously I'm not using a stencil and putting the Dixie mud on the stencil. I'm just using a wallpaper that's stuck down. Like I say, don't know how this is going to go, but if it doesn't work, we can always take it off and try something else. So I'm just going to kind of roughly gauge where this is going to go. The cheek of the ice cream man striking off whilst I'm trying to record. Okay, so if it's one thing I'm really terrible at, it's getting measurements right. I normally like to use too much paper and then trim it down with a craft knife, which I suppose I could do in this situation, because obviously it's only got to be a 1 mil out, a couple of mil out or whatever, and there's going to be a gap, and I don't want there to be a gap. So I might do that. I'm just going to trim it down slightly so that I haven't got that massive piece kind of overhanging. That's just going to give me like a couple of centimetres overhang. Not a massive amount, but it's not going to get in the way and flap about. And the same at the bottom. So the bottom's about there. So I'll just give myself a little bit more to play with. Like I say, I could measure something 5 or 6 times and I would still end up getting it wrong, or it not fitting. So we're going to do it this way. We're going to do it my way, the way that works for me, and I'll slightly overlap it and then I'll trim it down, I think, with a craft knife after it's dry. I think that's the safest bet. That's what always works for me anyway. I see people making templates out of paper. I've tried that. I've seen people measuring, cutting it exactly to size, and it's really satisfying. It just fits exactly in the slot. Never happens, never ever happens with me. So I always cut my paper or whatever I'm going to use, I cut it slightly too large, let it kind of overhang, and then just trim it down with a craft knife. That's how I do it. But like all things, there's more than one ways to do something. So if your way works for you, then you do that. To stick this down, I'm just going to use ordinary PVA glue. Now, usually when I do decoupage, I use Dixie Belle's clear coat to stick it down, but because this wallpaper is super thick, I'm going to need something a little bit stronger. So that's why I'm using PVA in this circumstance, but anything else that I use decoupage wise, I always use Dixie Belle's clear coats. And I just applied a really thin layer on the side panels and then pressed it down flat, and I'm going to trim it when the paper is still wet because I was way too impatient. That's the only reason. So the glue is still a little bit wet, which has made the paper a little bit softer, and it wasn't the best idea to do this, although it wasn't terrible. It was better when the paper was dry. So for the drawer front, I decided to do the same pattern on the drawer front as well on the front of the piece, and that way you just get kind of a continuous design around the piece. Again, a nice thin even layer of glue over the drawer, and then just press the paper on and make sure that you've got no air bubbles in it and it's nice and smooth and flat. And this time I did leave the glue to dry before I trimmed the paper down. So as you can see, I've left a little bit of an overhang. That's just how it works best for me. But if you wanted to cut it down to size and then stick it on, you could do, and that way you haven't got to trim it down afterwards. But I definitely can confirm I always trim paper down when it's completely dry. I don't know why I thought this was going to be any different. So I can confirm it was much easier to trim down when the paper was dry. And then because this drawer is obviously not in a recess like the side panels are, I just wanted to go around the edges and make sure all the corners and edges were completely stuck down. So I just got a little brush and went round and just felt if anything was kind of lifting or not that secure, and just dabbed a little bit of glue in just to make sure they were extra secure. And then for the side panels, although I trimmed them down, what happened was, because this paper is super thick, it did leave a very minuscule gap between the edge of the furniture and the edge of the paper. So to mask that, it's a bit like when you've got baseboards or skirting boards in your home and they're flush to the wall, but there is a tiny little gap, and you run decorators cork or filler around the top of the baseboard or the skirting board. This is exactly the same principle. So I'm using Dixie Mud, which is a very fine paste, and I'm just using my finger with a very small amount just to fill in that tiny little gap. And the difference this made, it just makes it look completely seamless, like there is no wallpaper stuck on there and there's a tiny little gap. It is just completely seamless. So this step was definitely a good idea that I kind of had just before I painted it, and I thought, I'm going to try it out. And then before the filler was dry, I just ran a damp cloth over it, and that way you're going to get any filler up and you don't have to sand. I did sand the edges of the drawer. Again, slightly different how this is, because it's a drawer that stands proud as opposed to a piece that's sitting in an alcove like the side panels. So I sanded that smooth to make sure there was no rough edges that were going to catch, and then I did the same colour base coat over the wallpaper, which is the drop cloth. Again, had I have known that the colour that was ending up was going to be completely different to my initial plan, I wouldn't have needed to do drop cloth at all, but I was still on with my original plan at this stage. I also sanded down the interior of the piece as well, filled the crack in there, and decided to paint that a contrasting colour at a later stage. So I'm fast forwarding through this bit because it's kind of irrelevant. I started out with the colour soft pink, and this was a wash of colour, so it had some water to it, and then I was going to rub it back and it was going to be a kind of pink and cream combo, very kind of pretty, and like I said in my initial idea, a bit shabby chic. Then I went in with tea rose because the soft pink wasn't quite ticking all the boxes. It was a bit too pink for me, and this tea rose pink is a little bit of a duskier pink. As you can see here, the colour is quite different to the initial soft pink that I put on. But again, wasn't really feeling this pink, although I just carried on with it at the time. And then I painted the inside in like a minty green shade. My kids are such jokers. Someone's put a piece of tape over the lens of my camera. Is it the end of the summer holidays yet? Let's just give you a little clean. There's all sticky stuff on the lens now. Anyway, I had to walk away from this piece for a while because I was quite honestly ready to burn it. I even put a little reel out on Facebook, if you follow me over on my Facebook page, basically saying help, because I just hit a wall with this. I really wasn't feeling the pink at all. It was too twee with the paper. It just wasn't feeling it, and it's sit in the corner like a naughty child for several days, all weekend in fact, and I've just been looking at it and walking past it and frowning at it. Anyway, I've spoken to my painty friend who I've known for a long time, and her furniture is spot on. Her name is Linda Leatham, and her furniture painting page is Annie Loveday. She does proper country, English country, cottagey kind of furniture, and I was like, help me. And she was like, she liked the pink, but she said, what about Hampton Olive? And I was like, oh, Hampton Olive, you can paint anything in Hampton Olive and it looks classy. It's just one of those colours. So as you can see here, I have started painting it in Hampton Olive, and I immediately like it better. So that's the colour I'm going to go with. I don't need to do any prep or anything because obviously I'm using Hampton Olive is from the Silk Mineral Paint range. And this is chalk mineral paint that I've painted in the pink. So I don't need to do anything. I don't even need to sand. I'd already started distressing it. As you can see, it's a bit shabbied up. So it's pretty smooth, although I don't mind a little bit of a bit of texture or rusticness because it's a pretty beat up piece. So that's the direction that I'm going to go. I'm going to use Hampton Olive Silk Mineral Paint, and then I'm probably going to put some brown wax on, but I'm going to see what it looks like before I get ahead of myself. So that's the colour, Hampton Olive to the rescue. So Dixie Belle Silk All-in-One Mineral Paint is a different paint to their chalk mineral paint. The main reason it's different is because it has a built-in top coat. So I didn't need to top coat this piece additionally. So this footage of me painting it was one of 2 coats that I did. I slightly distressed it. I painted the inside a slightly different colour to that kind of minty green colour. Obviously that's not going to work. I actually did the interior pink. So there was a little bit of pink on the finished piece. And that is pretty much it. I just whizzed through this because, like I say, it was dragging on for ages, but I can show you some of the close-ups of the finished piece. This is that kind of textured 3-dimensional patterned wallpaper, the interior of the drawer and the cupboard there with that little pop of pink. This colour is called Conch. It's also a silk mineral paint colour, and here's the final shot. Thank you for watching the video. As always, hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and I will catch you next time. Bye! Is a water... It's not... I can't remember what I got to. What was I just saying? Bye. Stay. Hello, welcome back to... Oh, my arm looks weird then. That looks weird. When you use best dang wax and kind of thing as one. If not, well, thanks for that, Herbie. Now I've got hair in my mouth. Ugh!